All right, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. This evening, we're going to be talking about Jamil Al-Amin with Nadim Ali, who is the Imam in the West End. He actually took the position that had been Jamil Al-Amin's before he was in prison quite a few years ago. And I'm so pleased to tell you I have here in the studio Nadim Ali. Welcome, Nadim. So there are all kinds of events happening here in Atlanta, and I know around the country. There are initiatives around the country to educate the public and the government, of course, about the case of Imam Jamil. I know there are efforts to appeal his conviction. There are a lot of things in place right now, so I know there are a lot of that will be discussed on Friday and other times as well. I mean, as much as possible, we want to get information out about Jamil and his case. Now, you've known him for a long time as well.
Yeah, since about 1979, and, growing up in the Philadelphia area, I'm originally from Chester, Pennsylvania. And, growing up, we knew of him, again, from the activities from the Civil Rights Movement. So
absolutely.
He was one of my childhood heroes. He's a few years older than me. And so when I was a young teen, he was in his 20s doing the work. He and, Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael. And so when he came to Islam, it was an honor, to meet him. But I met him in 1979.
Oh, you did? Where did you meet him?
Here. I called him
in Atlanta. Okay.
I wanted to come to Atlanta for a week, and I was doing radio. In fact, I always tell Harlan before I even unpacked my bags, we was living in Atlanta on his porch. I helped edit that on Harlan Joyce.
This is Harlan Joyce, who's the founder of WRFG. Is that right?
Yeah.
Famous for doing the Living Atlanta. So you were involved with the Living Atlanta?
Yeah, I helped edit that right on this porch. And I was involved with radio. My first degree was in radio, TV, film. And then I worked at Temple University's radio station. And then came down here. And I was only going to come for a week. I came the first day, called the Imam and said I need to, because it's an honor or sort of a privilege that one Muslim gives to another to give 3 days hospitality. So I called and said, can I stay at the mosque for 3 days? And he said, sure, come on down. Didn't know me. So the first day I came down and I called my wife, or she's now my wife, and my mother said, I'm not coming back the very first day.
Oh, wow.
And I was impressed with what they were trying to do in regards to establishing a community, a physical Islamic community.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because now, when did Jamil come to Atlanta?
I believe he was paroled to Atlanta in 1976 out of New York. I think Sister Karima Al-Amin his wife was already here.
I see.
And he, when he paroled out of prison back then, it was to Atlanta. There
to Jamil Al-Amin coming to Atlanta, what was there as far as the Islamic community is concerned?
There were Muslim communities. There have always probably been some type of, in fact, Georgia has some of the oldest presence of different Muslims. You have Muslim graveyards here. So even since slavery, Georgia has always been a pivotal point of interest for Muslims. You have one of the oldest graveyards in the country in Georgia.
Is that oldest Islamic graveyards? Is that right?
Yeah. You have the Bilali. In fact, brother's name was, they anglicized the name to Bailey. But there's Bilali, which was, Bilal, which from Bilal. He was a slave that had a community in Georgia near, I believe it's out in the islands, near Savannah.
Is that where our mutual friend Bilal Sunni Ali got his name as well?
No, well, Bilal ibn Rabah was the first. You ever heard the call to prayer?
Yes.
Well, the first person to call to prayer was a Ethiopian former slave named Bilal ibn Rabah. He was one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so many people, whether they're black, I know Palestinians with the name Bilal, I know Turks with the name Bilal.
Right, okay.
And so they take the name to honor him, Bilal ibn Rabah, who was one of the Prophet's companions. And in fact, there's a story where the Prophet he said he talked to Bilal. He said, I had a dream that I was in paradise, but your feet you were in front of me. And he said, what are you doing that you basically in front of me in paradise? He said, well, the only thing I can think of is that I am never without, we call it the wudu, an ablution that we wash up before prayer. He said, I'm never without a prayer ablution. He made it a habit to always stay in a state of prayer, ready to pray. And so that's Bilal. He was one of the great companions of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him.
Interesting.
In fact, he was tortured by his master. If you ever see the movie Muhammad, they used to play big salt rocks on his chest, and try to make him denounce Islam. And he would say, Ahad, one God. Because he had been from Ethiopia, he was familiar with Christianity and everything.
I see.
And so, and so that's where that name comes from.
Interesting.
History on that.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. I'm just so pleased that you're here. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm pleased to tell you I have here in the studio with me Nadim Ali, who is also a former board member here at WRFG and a longtime radio producer and communications person in any number of capacities. So it's wonderful to have you here, Nadim. I do want to go back, and we are talking about Jamil Al-Amin. There is, as I'd mentioned, I was reading this PSA, special events around the country this Friday, and a lot happening here in Atlanta. We will go back over that in a little bit. But I'm just really interested in hearing more about Islam during slavery time. So I know there were a number of slaves who came from Africa who were Islamic.
Right.
Do we have a lot of information about that?
There's a good book that people might want to look about, Sylvain Diop. She wrote a book called African Muslims Among American Slaves. About Sylvain, I believe is spelled Sylvan, Diop, like Sheikh Anta Diop, Diof. Sylvain Diop, and she does a lot of talks. You can probably find her on YouTube as well. And so some people put the figure as high as 30 to 40% of the slaves that were brought over were Muslim. And there was in her book, she quotes a friar in the 1500s said, "Don't bring the Muslim slaves over because we have not fully Christianized the native population." So they were trying to turn the Native Americans into Christians, and so they said, well, these people who already have a book and a way, they don't bring them over. So there was an effort not to bring as many Muslims, people who were practicing Islam, over in the beginning. This was in the 1500s that this quote was found.
Isn't that interesting?
And there were people who, practiced Islam during slavery. There's a video or a story about the Prince Abdul Rahman, who he was in Mississippi, and he was known to fast and pray in a plantation in Mississippi. There's a video that was put out called Prince of Slaves that talks about him. So you have like sporadic stories of people who were able to hold on to the Islam. There's even an attorney, I forgot his name, but his family secretly practiced Islam since slavery. He was
is that right?
And he's an attorney. He's a human rights attorney. In fact, I'll think of his name in a minute. I had the honor of meeting him years ago. But he was saying how he wasn't a convert to Islam. His family, because again, it was really against the law in many instances to practice Islam in the United States. There was a law that was passed. Well, basically, it was the whole issue because the way the white supremacists rationalized slavery was that just the white man's burden to give Christianity to the world. Yeah, right. It'll take 400 years of free labor, but we're going to give you Christianity.
I do want to mention that it's interesting because I've read some comparisons, say, between the British colonization and Spanish colonization. Now, when Spain started colonizing Cuba, this was just after they had kicked the Moors out of the Iberian Peninsula. Right. So apparently the Catholic Church did not allow slaves coming into Cuba who were practicing Muslims. Interesting. But I guess they were not as conscious about that in the United States.
What they would do is they would bring them to the islands, and they called that's where they would break the slaves.
Right.
And then maybe the children, then they would bring them over to the United States. So later on, many of the slaves that came over probably there was not a direct connection straight from Africa. They would stop and leave them there in the islands and basically try to break them and then bring them to the United States.
Well, they were given some kind of orientation.
Yes. Yeah, we can call it that. But yeah,
something.
But yeah, and then even you go back as far as Christopher Columbus, there was Muslims. They believed that he learned about the route to America from Muslim navigators.
That makes sense from West Africa, right?
And they say even in his diaries, in fact, we produced a program. I'll get you a copy of it. Mumia Abu Jamal, in fact, narrated. He was one of my mentors at the station in Philadelphia.
Oh, is that right?
And we did a program called The Islamic History of West Africa. And one of the entries of Columbus's logs, he said that they saw tribes of Africans fighting tribes of Native Americans, and so even before Columbus came, there was an African presence in this
Right.
part of the world.
Yeah, the Africans were the first to come.
Yeah, Mansa Musa. Remember, he sent boats of people over,
Right.
and told them, do not come back until you've exhausted your supplies.
Here I'm saying that Africans were the first to come, and people will say, well, the folks from
Norway,
from Asia came 1st.
Mm-hmm. There's
Look at the history.
I mean,
a
if you
little
go to
bit.
Mexico, you'll see African statues.
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
Predate the known presence of humans here. So
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the fact that the first human being was found in Africa, it's logical to state that these human beings got on boats and they traveled.
Right.
We just
Right.
didn't wait until the Europeans got the ability to travel to find different parts of the world. And as far as visiting China and all of those places, they had long relationships.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get back to Jamil now. So he came into Atlanta. What year did you say again?
I believe
In
that was 1976, but he had
1976.
already had a history of being here in Atlanta when he was in the movement.
I
As far
see.
as SNCC,
Right.
being involved with the
Right.
Student National Coordinating Committee, which was formerly known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating
Right.
Committee, he already had tons of relationships here. And then when he was paroled from prison out of New York, he was paroled to Atlanta, and that's when he opened up the community store. And the mosque, in fact, was already here. And he basically was later on elected the imam of that mosque. The mosque was founded by former students from AU.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Really?
and others.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, it was
Okay.
located directly across from where the present masjid is. the
So
mosque.
when was that created?
That was probably, let's see, 76, maybe 74 when that mosque.
Okay.
And then there was another effort even in the early 70s. But the major presence of Islam in North America was the Nation of Islam,
Right.
which was, it was a variation of Islam. And so so you had the Nation of Islam, and then we used to have the term Orthodox Muslims, people who followed the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and prayed 5 times a day and things like that. The Nation of Islam believed that Elijah Muhammad was a prophet. And so there was a distinct difference, and that was noticeable primarily in the African community. And so in Atlanta, you had a strong Nation of Islam presence, and then you had the presence of people who were establishing Orthodox Islamic organizations. There was, in fact, there's a brother who still comes to our masjid. His brother was one of the first imams, Dr. Antar Ibn Stanford. He's, in fact, a professor at the Atlanta Area Tech. But his brother was one of the first imams here. And then you have another brother who just completed a census of Muslims in the United States, and he was here. Also Ihsan Bagby, Dr. Ihsan Bagby, and he's still very active in the Muslim community nationally.
Interesting.
And he's a very close friend of Imam Jamil as well.
Interesting. So now, when Imam Jamil came here, he opened up this store. What kind of a store was this?
Just a regular grocery store, and I always tell people he gave,
I remember when he first came too, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
so
just a regular little grocery store,
Right.
and you had the basketball court. They had the guys who were playing ball down there, and they come up and get their drinks. The kids would come and get their little snacks, and you have all sorts of people coming through there. I mean, there's this bench that used to sit out in front of the store. And so let's see who sat on that bench. Let's see, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar sat on that bench.
Did he really?
Kwame Ture sat on that bench.
Oh, is that right?
Amiri Baraka sat on that bench. George Will interviewed him on that bench. Who else? What's the young lady from CBS? Diane Sawyer sat on that bench. She did an interview. So, I mean, I would watch all of these, renowned people just come through. John Carlos, he sat on that bench. He came through.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And Eldridge Cleaver's son, who is Ahmed Cleaver now, and he came and he became a Muslim at our masjid. He's written books. He's living overseas now, but he's become a really prominent Muslim.
Where is he living?
He's living in Saudi Arabia now. In fact, he was just here visiting during Ramadan. He came.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, he has a book called Islam on Ice, a variation of his father's book, Soul on Ice. But his book is called Islam on Ice.
What, meaning what?
Well, he's just talking about, he's just taking the title from his father's famous book, Soul on Ice.
Okay,
But he's
that's
just giving an explanation of what Islam is and what it isn't. and talking about his travel, his trek to Islam as well.
Okay. Well, I want to tell you listeners that you are listening to WRFG Atlanta 89.3 FM. My name is Heather Gray, and I'm pleased to tell you that I am talking with Nadim Ali, who is the Imam of the mosque in the West End that used to be the position that used to be held by Jamil Al-Amin, and we're talking a lot tonight, of course, about Jamil Al-Amin. There is a special event taking place in Atlanta and around the country about Jamil on Friday, and it's being referred to as the National Day of Action across the country to free Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the former H. Rap Brown. He has had a sizable presence, certainly in the city of Atlanta, but also throughout the Southeast, originally from Louisiana. And his brother, Ed Brown, also was a good friend of mine, as well as Nadim's. He died a few years ago, unfortunately, but he was also on the board of directors of WRFG. And another amazing activist involved in so many civil rights and justice issues here in the United States and around the world. Quite a family.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
To be perfectly frank. So, all right, just getting back to Jamil. Now, one of the things I know that he was concerned about, and in fact it was related to one of the imprisonments that he had, was he was very concerned about drugs in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came to Atlanta, that was one of his primary concerns, was to get rid of the drug runners in the West End part of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yes, and that's, basically, it's he has a saying, which is better to keep the peace than have to make the peace. In other words, to have a visible presence, to patrol the neighborhoods, to challenge people who are engaging in illegalities. And so this is, what had started taking place, because when the mosque was first put there, again, there was just a lot of illegal behavior going on. The park was, infested with a lot of things that, you don't want in a neighborhood as one of the oldest neighborhoods in the Atlanta area. And so what was organized, we call it the Sutra, and that's basically a security patrol where we would be out there all night, from 10 o'clock at night all the way to 6 o'clock in the morning, just patrolling the neighborhood, just making sure, just having that presence. People will keep moving. It's hard for a person to break into a car if they see somebody standing on the corner or patrolling past. We had Muslim neighbors throughout the neighborhood, and just the other neighbors as well. And we would, just again ride through the neighborhoods at night and just and if we see something illegal, even when you see prostitution, people would do things in the cars, and so we just stand back there and take the license plate down. And if somebody see you doing it, they usually take off, because they're probably married or not wanting to be there. So we kept that presence going for a while, and then if someone of them tried to start a house where they're selling drugs, we confronted them. And so these are some of the things that, we wanted to do to just try to, because again, what allows drug dealing to continue to fester in any neighborhood is for people to enable them and not say anything and know that something's going on. And, especially in the African American community, you have this concept of no snitching, stop snitching. In fact, they had T-shirts one time, stop snitching. And when I work with youth, I tell them snitching is when you're involved with the crime in the crime with the person, and you take the deal. Snitching is not keeping your neighborhood safe. That is a whole different thing, So because if you have drug dealing and then people are going to need money for drugs, then the next thing you have is burglaries and robberies and things of that nature. So that becomes a sore, an infected sore in your community, and so you deal with that. And you are able to deal with everything else that's going on in the area. And so he was a strong proponent of that, not just preaching from the, we call it the minbar, which is where the imam stands and gives the talk or the sermon. And so he wasn't just about preaching religion, he was about action as well. And again, his history as a person involved with movement taught him about organizing, taught him about basically community organizations and how you deal with things. And in fact, you mentioned the case prior to coming to Atlanta. In fact, that whole issue was also getting rid of drugs in New York. It was the similar type of situation.
Right.
And you had policemen who were on the take in that area, and that's what that whole thing was about.
I was going to bring that up as well, because here, if the community is playing a role in trying to protect the community from drugs and so forth, it's clear that the Atlanta Police Department was not doing this well.
It's hard, and I think...
Is that correct or not?
Well, because unless they put a policeman on every corner, now they have this concept
which is problematic too.
Yeah, it's
right?
problematic. And you have a police state.
Exactly.
And
so what do you do, right? So what you guys are
doing. You have to police your own community. And again, you don't put people under arrest, but you let them know that there's a presence and this is not going to be tolerated.
Yeah.
And then that's what we did. And so many of us, I remember one time my oldest daughter, she came home and was crying, and people, she was at school and being taunted. Oh, you live in the West End. That's a poor neighborhood. And this was in the maybe early 80s. And I said, no, we choose to live in the West End. We don't have to live in the West End. And I call it my little village. I lived in the Middle East for a couple of years, and then when people talking about their village, I said, oh, the West End is my village.
Exactly.
And so I told her we could live anywhere we want to, baby, and I choose to live here because, we have a mosque here and we have a presence here, and we've secured this area.
I think that one of the things that it's probably not discussed enough, so help me make sure that this statement is going to be correct. Nadim, I'm sure you'll correct me if it's wrong. But it's my understanding that when the Black Panther movement was becoming more of a presence in the United States, there was a deliberate attempt on the part of the government to undermine these efforts by bringing in drugs. I'm using the Black Panthers as one example, but the civil rights movement overall was becoming more of a presence in the United States. Is that correct?
That's an excellent point. My brother, he was a victim of what I call chemical warfare. He died of a heroin overdose at the age of 27. And what we have to understand is that drugs serve a purpose. And then we can even go back to the Nixon administration and how, there was an effort. They not only allowed drugs into certain neighborhoods, but they also criminalized so many drugs and to get rid of they said basically the blacks, and they didn't use that word, and the hippies. So they felt as though people who had any type of progressive thought or, anti-war movement at that time. And then you had people who, who for lack of, they didn't have resources, they were using drugs. And so they flooded the community at first with heroin and then later on with crack cocaine. And then the heroin basically pulled a lot of people out of any type of struggle, and they put them into active addictions for the most part. And so, and that's the whole thing, the lifestyle. Because again, politics is one thing, but when we look at having a certain moral compass, so if you don't get high, if you don't, basically engage in sexual relations outside of, committed relationships, then basically you're going to establish a certain type of discipline. And so that's the role that groups like the Black Panthers, and then even the Nation of Islam, we look at how Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, his former lifestyle, he came into a movement that basically promoted certain disciplines, and then as a result, also engaged in cleaning up certain areas and cleaning up human beings. I don't know if you ever heard the tape of Malcolm X when he was being interviewed by the FBI, and they were trying to flip him. He was doing his suspension.
No, I don't think I've heard that.
I have a copy. I'll send it to you.
I'd love that, yeah.
He's taping them while they're interviewing him. He taped them. And then they tried to flip him during his suspension from the Nation of Islam, right prior to him making the journey to Mecca. But I have a copy of it. I'll email it to you.
Oh, I'd love that.
And then you can play it for the audience.
Okay, that'd be great. That'd be great.
It's real interesting.
That'd be great.
But just having a certain amount of discipline basically can be a threat to the status quo, specifically if you're not promoting the same types of lifestyle that the status quo is promoting. And so you had the civil rights movement, which basically during my generation, the Panthers had more attraction than, say, other groups like the SCLC and the NAACP. So they saw that. And because even J. Edgar Hoover, there's a quote that he said that the most dangerous thing about the Black Panthers was that they were feeding young kids.
Yeah,
You know,
right. Doing something worthwhile.
Yeah, they were feeding young
Yeah,
kids,
right.
and they were policing the police,
Right.
and so that became a danger and a threat. And so, yeah, and so the next thing that you do is you flood the community with drugs, and so those who are susceptible to that, no matter how much discipline they may have, and because that group will give them discipline, but all it takes is people to start to try these drugs, and then they get hooked. First, as the Japanese say, first the man takes the drink. They talk about alcohol. Then the drink takes the drink, and then the drink takes the man. It's the same thing with drugs.
Wow.
Person takes the drug, then the drug takes the drug, and then the drug takes the person.
Wow. All right, let's get back to Jamil again. So now, I think it's fairly clear to most folks who look at the story of his life that the FBI had always had an interest in trying to undermine him and to imprison him again, to be perfectly frank. Now, he was accused of killing an Atlanta policeman and shooting another one. Right. One of the fellows died in this confrontation. However, there was also someone else who admitted to this killing. So, I mean, where are we with this right now?
Well,
Nadim?
They would not accept the confession, even when
the fellow who actually admitted killing this cop.
He was already incarcerated, and he admitted it and gave them information, and they refused to accept it. And then even when you look at the police officer who was wounded, they gave a description of someone who was much shorter than Imam Jamil, who didn't fit the description, as well as said that they wounded him. And so all of that was just thrown out. And then we have a problem with the FBI meeting privately with the judge. And so we felt as though that whole trial was just a means of just basically putting the imam in jail until he's either death by, they were trying to execute him at that point, or to die in prison. So we felt as though that was the effort. Even afterwards, there were young people who would get into trouble for one reason or another. And I remember one young woman coming to the imam who was the imam right after the imam went to jail. Imam Ibrahim came to him, and she was concerned. The police had stopped them, and then they showed the federal authorities showed them pictures of several members of our community, myself included, as along with their brother Imam Ibrahim, and said, "Do you know any of these people?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Why?" She said, "We want to, we're going to arrest all of them, and we're going to basically bulldoze the mosque." This is what this federal agent told this person. So even after the imam was incarcerated, there was still this effort to view us as a threat to the status quo.
Well, let's go back to this case again. Now, full disclosure, listeners out there, during the trial, during Jamil Al-Amin's trial in 2002, we at WRFG did absolutely everything we could to get information out about what was happening, worked closely under the leadership of his brother, Ed Brown. And it was just an honor to do that. We were not successful in our efforts to, he was, of course, prosecuted and put into jail, but...
And we saved his life, because they were trying to kill him.
I think that that's probably true as well, but one of the things that you were talking about, the FBI meeting with the judge, and I did go to the courtroom quite a bit as well, and I remember we just kept hearing about the FBI meeting with the judge in the judge's quarters. I thought,
without his lawyers present.
Without his lawyers present. This is outrageous. It seems to me that in itself is a violation of some law, must be somewhere. But in any case, so there is now an appeal in process. We look forward to being updated on that. I don't know what the status of that is right now. Do you know, Nadim?
The courts move so slowly. So right now, the first appeal through Georgia was denied, and so the second appeal, they're waiting for that now. It's still in progress. So I don't know all the status of the actual appeal right now, but it's still moving very slowly. It hasn't been looked at yet.
Now, I don't have the exact information about this, but I know there's been an effort to try to get released papers that the FBI had on Jamil. I understand that there was something like 18,000 papers,
and they said that
some sort from the FBI.
And they said that most of the papers were after he became a Muslim.
That's
when
interesting.
I talked to his wife, she said, I believe it was like 14,000 pages of after he became a Muslim. The other ones were prior to civil rights movement activities.
Interesting. So now, and I know there's just so much to say about this, but now you've been visiting him from time to time.
I visited him when he was here, as well as when he was in Pennsylvania, while he was in the Supermax. And that's the other thing, is that they, for about 10, 12 years, they had him, moved him from Georgia to the Supermax prison in Colorado.
Well, let's talk about that as well. We have talked about that some on the program, but the state of Georgia, I think they felt they couldn't handle someone with his prominence, because he was being asked by Muslim prisoners to serve as the imam for Georgia's prisoners. Is that correct? Georgia Islamic prisoners. Is that correct?
They initiated a petition to ask the Department of Corrections to allow him to serve as the imam, for the prisoners in Georgia. And they felt threatened at that point. And then at that point, then they have an arrangement with the federal authorities that if they feel as though they can't handle a prisoner, then they can swap, or they could allow the federal authorities to house a state prisoner, and the state of Georgia will pay for that. And so I'm okay with that to some extent. Okay, we have this big prison right there on Boulevard, the Atlanta Federal Prison.
Right.
And they didn't transfer him
there. They could have transferred him there, couldn't they?
They could have.
I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't realized that. They could have, yeah.
But they sent him not only, and they could have. And there's prison in Alabama. I've been down in Talladega. I was at Talladega, Alabama. There's prison in Mississippi. There's federal prisons all over the country, and Guam.
Yeah.
But they sent him to the Supermax.
Explain what the Supermax is.
Supermax is a prison that was put together to house what they feel is the most dangerous people in the United States, dangerous prisoners that they may have. And these are people who have been convicted of terrorism charges, or mass murders, organized criminals who are involved in different mafia-type activities. And so they're allowed only 1 hour out a day. It's 23 and 1. And in that 1 hour, they can exercise. They can, basically take care of their needs, shower and all of that in 1 hour. And then they lock down for 23 hours a day. They only allow legal visits and family visits, phone calls maybe once a month, something to that effect. Letters are screened, extremely screened. It's just basically it is. It's like probably living in a coffin for the most part.
Nadim, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and continue that discussion. Stay tuned. Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm pleased to tell you I'm talking with Nadim Ali, who is the imam on the masjid, at the masjid in the West End part of Atlanta. And we're talking about Jamil Al-Amin. There are special events taking place this Friday in Atlanta, around the country. It's called the National Day of Action Across the Country to Free Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the former H.Rap Brown. So, and you will be hearing more about this. We will be having special programs here at WRFG on Friday as well. So now here he is sent to, you were saying it was like being in a coffin, essentially, at the Colorado.
Supermax.
The Supermax
in Florence,
prison.
Colorado. And people can look it up and see the origins of it, and, and how, it's just basically almost like being underground. Some people call it the underground prison.
He's not there now, which is fortunate. Where is he? His health is not great, right? His health.
He became very ill while he was there, and then he was transferred to the federal prison. It's Canaan, USP Canaan, in the Poconos of Pennsylvania. So he was there for maybe probably about a year and a half.
And you went to see him there, right?
Yeah, I went to see him there. It was up in the Poconos, very cold.
Right.
But at least he was in general population there.
Right.
And so, and then from there, he requested a warmer climate, and they sent him to Arizona.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
Well,
so
it's
sort of
too
good.
warm, yeah.
It's too warm.
Yeah.
All right.
He was trying to get south. He was trying to come to Mississippi.
Okay.
But they, they just transferred him to the prison out in Arizona at this point. And so he's, again, still in general population. He's, able to, call more often and things like that.
That's good. That's good. So how is his health now?
He's getting better.
Excellent.
But he's still, his spirits are very good. He calls usually once or twice a week and checks in.
Right.
And, in fact, I'll be doing a presentation on him in October in Detroit. They're honoring him on his birthday, October 4th, and so they're asking me to come up and to just do a presentation on his life, and so I'm going to try to get some words from him to share with the people when I go up there and to
wonderful.
Detroit.
That's great.
But
okay.
but his health is much better. He was and as a result of really a lot of activities of people on the outside, letters, shutting down phone systems in the Bureau of Prisons, and some of the alumni from the civil rights movement checking in and talking to the people who were in positions to make a difference in his housing. And so, alhamdulillah, it took pressure, from the outside, to make this change.
Our time is going so quickly. I can't believe this. I need to get you. I'm going to say this over the air. I want to get you to back here again, and we'll have more of a discussion about all this.
You know how to reach out to. But I wanted to give greetings to all the people. In fact, Imam Jamil was arrested on Eid of that year. Was it 2001? Eid al-Adha is when people go to Mecca. And the people who don't go to Mecca, we have a prayer. And today we had a group prayer.
Okay, excellent.
And so I wanted to say Eid Mubarak to all the people who participated in Eid today.
All right, thank you for that. So let's talk about what else people can do to assist.
I think writing letters, to him is that really helps his spirit to let him know. First of all, research for specifically our young people. You have a lot of people involved with different movements. And here you had a man who had been involved with him in the movement since he's probably like 17 years old. And his whole life was on some type of various movements. And so I think writing him letters, writing the authorities, at least, trying to get him back to either Georgia or, closer to his home, writing the Bureau of Prison, writing the Department of Corrections, writing the governor of the state. The governor of the state can have him, with just a stroke of a pen, have him transfer back to Georgia.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, that's an
because
interesting
it was an
point.
agreement.
Thank you for that. Okay.
He has no federal charges.
I know that's the crazy thing. Here he had no federal charges, and yet he was transferred, but that's interesting. So, all right, that's a good point. And if people want to get additional information about this or addresses and so forth, they can go to the website.
They can go to the website.
Let me give you the website, which is www.imamjamilactionnetwork.org. And I will be sending out this information as well. So if you would like to be on my email list for this, please send me an email at heather@wrfg.org, and I'll put you on my list.
And it would be good. Like I said, there'll be a lot of activities going on this week in various cities around the country. And if specifically our young people who are so social media savvy, we need you, especially the students. You can make it a class project to get involved.
Good idea.
With this, with the Imam Jamil Action Network, IJAN, and because they need that support.
Yeah. All right. Great. So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, anytime you need, you know how to get to me.
Well, absolutely. So, I'd like to just end by continuing to talk a little bit about his work on the West End. It was really, I guess, when he came here in the 1970s, there was somewhat of a presence here, but he in the Islamic community, but he energized that, right?
Yeah, and so
he made quite a difference.
And you can look at the fact there may have been only 2 masjids.
I see.
In
How many
Atlanta,
are there now? Okay.
Well over 100.
Are you serious?
Well over 100.
Wow.
Yeah, well over. In fact, he started the group, and that's one of the other things he did locally. He helped start the group was called the Majlis Ashura, which is the organization of all the different masjids, where the imams get together and they meet and they try to regulate the affairs of the different Muslims in the community. Imam Jamil was one of the founders of that. He organized it, and that's again comes from his civil rights movement.
Right.
He was the vice president, of a group that nationally lobbied not only Republicans but Democrats. When they first organized this group, the Muslim Council, American Muslim Council, he was the first vice president of that group, and then he also organized the Bosnian Task Force, and so he worked locally as well as nationally on establishing all sorts of organizations. Because again, from that move, he had a movement mindset.
Yes,
and
right.
So, a person doesn't become a Muslim and they leave all of that.
Yeah.
So he still had that whole movement mindset. And like I say, Bosnia Task Force, when the atrocities were happening in Bosnia, to make people aware of that. organizing Muslim communities all around the country, all around Atlanta, and using our community as a model, to live around the mosque, establish businesses around the masjid, so that all my kids were raised in the West End.
And when you say a masjid, what does that mean
masjid
exactly?
is just Arabic for mosque.
I see.
A mosque is more of an anglicized term.
I see.
Whereas masjid, to make prostration in Arabic, it means sajda. And so masjid means place of prostration.
I see.
And so that's the proper term. And then when you hear it plural, masajid, that's mosque.
Well, let me ask you another very basic question about Islam. When you will say Muhammad, you'll say peace be upon him.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
It's asked in the Quran that when, not only Muhammad, peace be upon him, but Jesus, peace be upon him.
I see.
Moses, peace be upon him. Any prophet, peace be upon them all. We say that just as a term of honor.
I see.
We asking God's peace be upon them. We might say, Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, God's peace be upon them. And so that's not only for him, but we would say it for all the prophets, peace be upon them.
All right.
And that's just, you'll hear people, say that, whenever they mention any of the prophets' names.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Just a point of honor.
Point of honor, right, right. So, Nadim, how, in the masjid on the West End, how often do you have services and so forth?
We, of course, we prayed the 5 times a day.
Right.
And, but our Juma services are every Friday. Our day of worship is Friday. It was the Jewish day of worship is Saturday, and the Christian day of worship is Sunday. And then there's classes throughout the week where we learn Arabic. We learn Arabic because the Quran was revealed in Arabic.
Right.
And so, there are English translations. There's translations in every language, but it's just like when you read a translation, it's like me biting an orange, describing it to you. But if you read it in its natural language, then you get the full taste of it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Again, we are talking with Nadim Ali, who is the Imam of the Masjid in the West End part of Atlanta that used to be headed by Jamil Al-Amin. And I want to repeat again that there are events this Friday, the 16th, in honor of Imam Jamil, the Imam Jamil Action Network, and they're calling for this day, this National Day of Action across the country to free Imam Jamil Al-Amin, the former H. Rap Brown. And I'm going to ask everyone to stay tuned for Sabukwe and Revolutionary African Perspectives. And I want to once again thank Nadim Ali so much for coming in. And I do want to get you back again. I want to have more of a discussion. All right. Again, stay tuned for Sabukwe, and we will be back next week.